What if some of the most dominant interpretations of Islam, the concepts shaping global headlines and influencing international opinion, are based on deep misunderstandings or political and cultural biases? We live in a time where complex ideas are tragically reduced to simple sound bites. In this video, we're going to dive deep past the noise and the cultural clutter, directly into the primary sources, the Quran and the authentic Hadith. We will challenge 5 of the biggest, most persistent misconceptions about Islam, from the true meaning of its most politicized term to the philosophy of destiny and the foundational role of women's rights. It's time to set the record straight and uncover the sophisticated philosophical core of one of the world's largest religions. This is arguably the most distorted and politicized term in the modern world. For many, jihad immediately translates to holy war or violent conquest. But when we strip away the headlines and look at the linguistic root of the word, it means to strive, to struggle, or to exert effort. Classical Islamic scholars universally differentiate between 2 critical forms of jihad. First, there is Al-Jihad, al-Akbar, the Greater Jihad. This is defined as the internal, spiritual struggle against one's own lower self, ego, greed, and base desires. It is the lifelong, constant effort to live a moral and ethical life, to master one's own internal chaos. This concept is so central that many scholars cite a famous hadith where Prophet Muhammad returned from a battle and stated, "We have returned from the lesser jihad to the greater jihad." This statement decisively establishes the internal struggle as the superior, more difficult path and the spiritual priority. Second, there is Al-Jihad al-Asghar, the lesser jihad. This refers to physical defense, often translated as defensive warfare. Crucially, classical Islamic jurisprudence lays out extremely strict ethical rules for this form. It must be strictly defensive, cannot target non-combatants, and must cease the moment the aggression stops. The misconception is that the exceptional case has consumed the spiritual essence of the rule. The original intent and primary focus of jihad is moral and self-development, not military expansion. When media or popular culture depicts the Islamic concept of Jannah, paradise, the focus is often exclusively on lush gardens, flowing rivers, and material comforts. This portrayal leads to the misconception that the ultimate goal of the Muslim life is a purely physical, even hedonistic, afterlife. However, when we explore the theological tradition, these vivid descriptions are understood as powerful symbols meant to convey a state of bliss beyond human experience. The Quran uses sensory language that resonates with human concepts, especially in the desert climate where the revelation began, to describe a joy that is ultimately non-material. The ultimate reward is repeatedly emphasized in the Quran and the Hadith as something far deeper. Al-Rida, the acceptance or good pleasure of God. The Quran explicitly states, "But the acceptance of God is greater." This highlights that while the physical comforts of Jannah are real, they are secondary to the spiritual state. The concept is that reaching a state where the Creator is completely pleased with the created being is the ultimate form of spiritual and existential fulfillment. The highest reward is universally accepted as the vision of God, as described in hadiths, and achieving eternal communion, proving that Jannah is fundamentally a spiritual state of being, not just a luxurious locale. Another persistent misconception is the idea that the Islamic doctrine of al-Qadr, divine decree or fate, leads directly to fatalism, the belief that everything is predetermined and human effort is therefore pointless. This interpretation entirely negates individual responsibility. While Islam firmly affirms God's absolute knowledge and power, nothing happens outside of God's ultimate will. Theological tradition emphasizes a crucial distinction. God's perfect knowledge does not negate human choice. Scholars often discuss the concept of al-Juz al-Ikhtiyari, the human sphere of choice or partial free will. Humans are endowed with the capacity to choose their actions and intentions. God does not force a person to choose right or wrong. Rather, God knows what the person will choose before they choose it. This is omniscience, not coercion. The entire ethical system rests on the principle of accountability, masuliya. In Islam, every person is held accountable for their actions and intentions on the Day of Judgment. This comprehensive system of divine justice and moral consequence would be rendered entirely meaningless if humans were merely passive robots following a rigid, unchangeable script. Therefore, al-Qadr should be understood not as a chain binding human action, but as a framework of ultimate reality that places the heavy burden of effort, striving, and ethical choice squarely on the shoulders of the individual. In many parts of the world, Islam is associated with the systematic oppression of women. While cultural practices in various regions have certainly distorted gender roles, a closer look at the 7th century texts reveals that Islam was revolutionary in establishing fundamental legal and financial rights for women. In 7th century Arabia and much of the world, women were treated as property. Islam changed this by granting women rights to inherit property, both from parents and spouses, the right to financial independence, the woman's earnings belong to her alone, and the right to consent in marriage. These were unprecedented legal protections at the time. Furthermore, the spiritual equality of men and women is clearly stated in the Quran. The believing men and believing women are allies of one another, and both are promised the same reward for their righteous deeds. The debate around veiling, hijab, is often misinterpreted as only about female subservience. The Quranic guidance on modesty is directed to both men and women, lowering the gaze and ethical conduct. While the physical implementation of modesty varies widely across cultures and is subject to theological debate, the intention in the sources is not simply female subjugation, but promoting a moral atmosphere of dignity and preventing objectification for all members of the community. The final misconception is that Sharia is a monolithic, static, politically rigid legal code meant to be enforced globally as a singular form of theocratic governance. In reality, Sharia literally means the path to the watering place. It refers to the broad ethical and moral framework laid out in the Quran and the Sunnah. It is the divine guidance on how to live an ethical life. The actual human effort to interpret and implement these principles is called fiqh, jurisprudence. Fiqh is inherently diverse, dynamic, and subject to human reason. It is why 4 different major schools of jurisprudence, Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi'i, Hanbali, and various others developed simultaneously. The core political philosophy derived from Sharia principles is built on 2 concepts, al-Adl, justice, and al-Shura, consultation democracy. The goal is to establish a just society where rulers govern through mutual consultation and consent, not divine, unquestionable authority. The specific form of the state, caliphate, republic, monarchy, is left open to human interpretation based on the needs of the time, so long as it upholds justice and accountability. Sharia is fundamentally an ethical blueprint, not a mandatory political constitution. We have journeyed through these 5 profound concepts: jihad, Jannah, qadr, women's rights, and Sharia, moving past sensationalism and political simplification to find clarity in the sources. What emerges is a faith that is highly sophisticated, deeply ethical, and complex. It is a faith where the greatest struggle is the inner struggle, where the ultimate reward is spiritual communion with the divine, and where destiny requires active choice, not passive submission. These corrections are vital, because understanding the core philosophy of a faith moves us away from judgment and toward genuine dialogue. By separating the cultural misunderstandings and external biases from the theological bedrock, we gain a much richer appreciation for the complexity and enduring depth of Islam. If this exploration has challenged your assumptions and deepened your perspective, please subscribe and join us as we continue to decode the world's most enduring belief systems.